The clock struck 8 as I, Eleanor, sat at the dining table, sipping my tea in silence. At 55, I prided myself on maintaining a sense of style and grace. My job as a senior editor at a lifestyle magazine wasn't just a career, it was my passion, a part of who I was. Richard, my husband of nearly 30 years, sat across from me, his eyes glued to his phone. The silence between us wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, loaded with years of unspoken resentments and faded love. "I wish you'd just die already," Richard muttered, not looking up from his screen. His words sliced through the quiet room like a sharp knife. I felt a chill run down my spine, not from fear, but from the sheer coldness of his statement. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Richard finally looked up, his expression one of annoyance rather than regret. "You heard me. It's not like you're doing anything valuable, just taking up space." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the man I had married, the man who had once promised to cherish me. Now he wished me dead. Our marriage had become a shadow of what it once was. Richard's outdated beliefs, his insistence that a woman's place was in the home, clashed fiercely with my independence and career ambitions. It wasn't just about us anymore. His mother, Claire, a widowed woman of considerable wealth, had become a point of contention. Richard often spoke of her fortune, eyeing it like a vulture. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice tinged with disgust. "Is this really what our marriage has come to? You wishing me dead?" Richard scoffed. "Marriage? This is a contract of convenience, nothing more. And let's not pretend you're not waiting for Claire to kick the bucket for her money." His accusation was like a slap in the face. Unlike him, I had never seen Claire as a walking bank account. She was a kind, intelligent woman who deserved better than a son waiting for her demise. "You're a monster," I said quietly, standing up from the table. "I don't even know who you are anymore." Richard's laugh was cruel and hollow. "Oh, Eleanor, you never knew me. You were too busy with your precious career." I walked away from the table from Richard, feeling a mixture of anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of loss. Not for what we had, but for what we could have had, if only Richard had been the man I thought he was. That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of Richard's words pressed down on me. This wasn't just a loveless marriage. It was a battlefield, and I was tired of being the only one fighting for peace. It was time to make a decision, one that would change the course of my life. The first rays of dawn brought a new resolve. I would no longer be a passive participant in this farce of a marriage. Richard had shown his true colors, and it was time for me to show mine. The following weeks were a blur of silent meals and cold stares. Richard's cruelty had unveiled a truth I had long tried to ignore. Our marriage was nothing but a hollow shell. Each evening, Richard would retreat into his world, often whispering into his phone or laughing at texts. The secrecy of his actions raised a red flag in my mind. Was he having an affair? Strangely, the thought didn't hurt as much as I expected. Perhaps it was because my own feelings for him had withered into nothingness. One night, as I lay awake, I heard Richard's muffled voice from the living room. Curiosity overtook me, and I tiptoed to the door, pressing my ear against it. "That old witch, she's just hoarding her wealth," he sneered. "Once she's gone, we'll be set for life." His words were like poison, seeping into my heart. He wasn't just betraying me, he was betraying his own mother. Claire, who had always been kind to us, didn't deserve such a fate. My heart ached for Claire. She was a strong woman, but the thought of her own son wishing her dead was too much to bear. I decided then that I needed to protect her, not just from Richard, but also from the cruel grip of greed. The next day I visited Claire. Her home was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the coldness of my own. We sipped tea, and I watched her, the lines on her face telling stories of a life well lived. "Claire, you know you can always count on me, right?" I said, reaching across the table to hold her hand. "If you ever need anything, I'm here." Claire smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I know, Eleanor, you've always been more of a daughter to me than a daughter-in-law." Her words warmed my heart, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered. I knew I had to act, to somehow shield her from the greed and malice that had consumed Richard. That evening, as I lay in bed, I realized the extent of my isolation. My marriage was a facade, and the man I shared my home with was a stranger driven by selfishness. But amidst the darkness, a plan began to form in my mind, a plan to expose Richard's true intentions and protect Claire from his clutches. I would need to be careful, cunning even. It was time for the hunted to become the hunter. With each passing day, my resolve strengthened. Richard had underestimated me, and that was his biggest mistake. The stage was set for a reckoning, and I was ready to play my part. The days turned into weeks, each one passing with the heavy knowledge of Richard's betrayal. It was during one of these monotonous days that fate took a sharp, unexpected turn. I had just returned from work when I received a phone call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was Dr. Harper, Richard's physician. "Mrs. Williams, it's about your husband," Dr. Harper said, his tone grave. "We've found something concerning in his latest tests. It's serious, and we need to discuss it with you." A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. What could be so serious that the doctor needed to talk to me first? I met with Dr. Harper the next day. The hospital's sterile walls and the antiseptic smell did nothing to calm my nerves. Dr. Harper's words were a shockwave that shook me to my core. "Your husband has a terminal condition," he said. "I'm sorry, but he has only about 6 months left." The news hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything, Richard was still my husband, the man I had once loved. The thought of him facing death alone was unexpectedly heartbreaking. But then a twisted idea crept into my mind. What if Richard never knew about his diagnosis? The thought was vindictive, petty even, but the seed was planted. I returned home, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Richard was his usual self, dismissive and absorbed in his phone. The irony of the situation was not lost on me. Here he was, wishing death upon others, unaware of his own impending doom. "Honey, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. Richard barely glanced up. "What now, Eleanor? Can't you see I'm busy?" His indifference fueled my resolve. "It's important," I insisted. With a heavy sigh, he put down his phone. "Fine, what is it?" I took a deep breath. "The doctor called. He said you have 6 months to live." For a moment, Richard just stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief. Then a cruel smile twisted his lips. "6 months, huh?" he said, his voice laced with mockery. "Well, isn't that a twist of fate?" His reaction was devoid of fear or sadness. Instead, there was a perverse acceptance, as if he saw it as an opportunity to live without consequences. The following weeks were surreal. Richard began living as if each day was his last, squandering money on lavish items and extravagant nights out. He was like a man possessed, desperate to squeeze a lifetime into 6 months. And through it all, I played the part of the concerned wife, all the while keeping the dark secret that it was he, not I, who was living on borrowed time. As I watched Richard spiral into a reckless abandon, a part of me felt vindicated. This was his karma, a fitting end for a man who had shown nothing but selfishness and cruelty. But another part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, couldn't help but feel a twisted satisfaction in watching him unknowingly live out his last days in a delusion of immortality. It was a cruel game, one that I never imagined I'd play. But in this twisted tale of revenge, I was no longer just a victim. I was the architect of his downfall. As Richard's self-destruction escalated, a new character entered the stage of our twisted drama. It was a chilly evening in late autumn when she appeared at our doorstep, unannounced and unexpected. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with an air of confidence that belied her years. Her name was Annabelle. "May I help you?" I asked, eyeing her cautiously. "Mrs. Williams, I'm Annabelle. I think we need to talk about Richard," she said, her voice steady and composed. The pieces fell into place with a sinking feeling in my stomach. This was the woman Richard was having an affair with. The audacity of her showing up at my house was infuriating, yet I was intrigued by what she had to say. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "Let's hear what you have to say." We sat in the living room, an awkward tension hanging in the air. Annabelle was the first to break the silence. "I know about Richard's condition," she began, "and I think it would be best for everyone if you two separated. Richard deserves to spend his last months happy." The suggestion was outrageous. Not only was Annabelle asking me to step aside for her affair, but she also believed the lie that Richard was the one dying. "And why would I do that?" I asked, my voice laced with disdain. "Because it's what Richard wants," she replied, her tone almost pleading. "He's suffering, and staying in this marriage is only making it worse." Her words were like a slap in the face. This woman, this intruder, had the audacity to speak of suffering while she played a part in destroying my marriage. You speak of suffering, I said, my voice rising. But what do you know of the years of neglect, the emotional abuse, the utter loneliness of a loveless marriage? Annabelle's confidence seemed to waver, but she held her ground. I love him, and I know he loves me too. We plan to be together once it's over. The situation was absurd. Here I was, speaking to my husband's mistress about his fictional terminal illness, a lie that had spiraled out of control. Annabelle, you're living in a fantasy, I said coldly. Richard isn't the man you think he is, and this affair, it's just a game to him. She shook her head, a look of disbelief on her face. No, you're wrong. We have something real. I wanted to laugh, to shout, to tell her the truth about everything. But I held back, a part of me wanting to see how this farce would play out. Believe what you will, I said, standing up. But know this, Richard is not a man capable of love. He's a user, a manipulator, and sooner or later you'll see him for what he truly is. Annabelle stood up, her eyes betraying a hint of doubt. I guess we'll see, she said before turning and walking out. As the door closed behind her, I was left with a sense of emptiness. This game of deception and revenge was taking a toll on me. I was caught in a web of my own making, and with each passing day the lines between right and wrong blurred a little more. But there was no turning back now. The stage was set, the players in place. All that was left was to see this twisted drama to its bitter end. The days following Annabelle's visit were a twisted dance of deception and revelation. Richard's extravagant lifestyle reached new heights, and his nights out became more frequent. It was as if he was trying to outrun the clock, to squeeze every last drop of life from his remaining days. 6 months since the doctor's call, the day of reckoning finally arrived. Richard came home late, as had become his norm, reeking of alcohol and arrogance. I sat in the living room, the lights dimmed, waiting for him. Well, look at you, playing the waiting wife, Richard sneered as he stumbled in. What's the occasion, counting down the days to my demise? His words, meant to wound, barely scratched the surface of my resolve. I had grown immune to his barbs. Actually, yes, I replied calmly. It's been 6 months, Richard. Aren't you curious about how much time you have left? Richard laughed, a hollow sound filled with denial. I feel fine, Eleanor. Better than ever, in fact. Death can wait. The irony of his statement was almost amusing. He was so engrossed in his lie that he had lost touch with reality. But there's something you should know, I continued, my voice steady. It wasn't me who received that diagnosis 6 months ago. It was you. For a moment, there was silence. Richard's face, previously flushed with drunken confidence, paled. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The terminal illness, Richard. It's yours, I said, the words feeling heavy in the air. Richard's laughter was manic, tinged with hysteria. You're lying. This is just some sick game you're playing. But as the reality of my words began to sink in, his facade crumbled. The man who stood before me was no longer the arrogant Richard I had known. He was scared, lost, a shadow of his former self. You knew, all this time you knew? He stammered, his voice breaking. I did, I admitted. And I watched as you squandered your days, thinking they were mine. The room was filled with a tense silence, the weight of years of lies and deception hanging heavy between us. In that moment, I saw Richard for what he was, a man consumed by his own selfish desires, now faced with the consequences of his actions. The next morning, Richard was gone. He had left without a word, leaving behind only the echo of his broken pride. I stood in the empty house, a sense of relief washing over me. The game was over. The lies were unraveled. In his quest for a life free of responsibility, Richard had lost everything. As I stood there, I realized that this was not a victory. There was no joy in watching a man fall from grace, even one as undeserving as Richard. What I felt was a profound sense of freedom, the chains of a loveless marriage finally broken. The drama, the revenge, it was all over. I was free to start anew, to find peace in a life unburdened by the weight of Richard's deceit. It was a fresh start, a chance to rediscover the person I had lost in the shadow of a failing marriage. And as I looked out the window at the rising sun, I knew that this was just the beginning. A new chapter in my life was waiting to be written, and for the first time in a long time I was ready to embrace it. In the weeks that followed Richard's departure, a profound sense of tranquility settled over the house. It was as if his absence had lifted a heavy veil, allowing light and air to fill spaces darkened by years of resentment and pain. I spent my days reacquainting myself with the simple pleasures of life, reading books I had long neglected, tending to the garden that had once been my sanctuary, and reconnecting with old friends. One afternoon, Claire visited me. She looked frail, but her eyes still sparkled with the same sharp intelligence and warmth. We sat in the garden, surrounded by blooming flowers and the gentle hum of life. "Eleanor, I heard about Richard," Claire began, her voice tinged with sadness. "I'm sorry it had to end this way." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "It's all right, Claire, it was long overdue. We were both prisoners in that marriage. Now we're free." Claire nodded, a small smile gracing her lips. "You were always the daughter I never had, Eleanor. Richard's choices are his own. You shouldn't have to pay for his mistakes." Her words were a balm to my soul. In all the years of my tumultuous marriage, Claire had been a constant source of support and understanding. "Claire, I want to thank you," I said, my voice heavy with emotion, "for everything. You've been more of a family to me than anyone else." As we sat there, basking in the serenity of the garden, I realized how much of my life I had spent under Richard's shadow. But no more. I was my own person, with dreams and desires that extended beyond the confines of a loveless marriage. The next chapter of my life was just beginning, and I was determined to make it count. I would travel, write that book I always talked about, maybe even fall in love again. The possibilities were endless, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future. As for Richard, I heard he had left town, chasing after some illusory freedom that would always be just out of reach. I felt no malice towards him, only a distant pity for a man who could never find contentment in what he had. Life, I had learned, was too short for regrets and bitterness. It was a gift to be cherished, a canvas to be painted with bold, bright colors. As Claire and I laughed and reminisced, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The drama, the pain, the revenge, it was all behind me. Ahead lay a path of my own making, a journey towards self-discovery and happiness. And as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the garden, I knew that this was just the beginning. A new chapter, a new life, a new Eleanor.
My name is Patricia, and I am 48 years old. I live with my husband and mother-in-law in a well-connected suburb near the train station, offering excellent access to the city center. When we were house hunting, Ethan, who had just been promoted to a managerial position, insisted on a spacious apartment despite the high rent. The extra space seemed worth the cost. Ethan, 6 years my senior and a divorcee, was introduced to me by a friend. His mature, comforting presence was something I had quickly come to rely on. We decided to get married after 3 years of dating. Even when I shared with him my infertility due to past illness, his affection never faltered. My feelings for him remained strong, even after I learned about his previous marriage and his son Willie, whom he had from that relationship. "I'm truly sorry to ask you to live with my parents and son," Ethan had said. "I promise I won't let you suffer. I'll make sure you're happy. Give me space and prevent me from feeling suffocated." He suggested moving to this large apartment where I could have my room. Willie, who was turning 9 that year, would not need much care, especially with his grandmother around to help. After his divorce, Ethan's parents helped with child care until his father tragically passed away in an accident, leaving his mother to take over as Willie's caretaker. From our very first meeting, Willie had barely made eye contact with me. Initially, I attributed Will's reserved demeanor to his age and possible shyness, so I didn't let it bother me too much. As long as the family accepted me, I felt content to be a part of their household. My mother-in-law, a woman of quiet elegance, had shown me such politeness during my formal introduction post-engagement that I believed we could coexist peacefully. She had set clear expectations from the start. "I'll continue to prepare the meals as usual." Ethan often comes home late, so it's okay if we eat at different times, right, Patricia? I'll leave the cleaning and laundry to you. Let's work well together, she had said. After marrying, I shifted from full-time to part-time at the pharmacy to manage the household chores more effectively. My new schedule meant I wouldn't get home until nearly 9:05 p.m., but dinner was always ready, a small comfort in my solo dining routine. My mother-in-law and Willie usually ate before I arrived, reinforcing a sense of isolation even within my married life. Initially, I wondered if this was all there was to family life, but gradually I accepted this as just our way. Despite our seemingly smooth start, it became clear that my mother-in-law never truly liked me or considered me a part of the family. Trying to build a relationship with Willie, I asked about his school activities. Willie, the school's activity day is before summer, right? When is it? We're all going to see you, aren't we? Before he could answer, my mother-in-law quickly intervened. We'll go there, just Ethan and me, Patricia. You don't need to worry about it. Misunderstanding her intention as considerate, I persisted. I can get the day off work. Let's all go together. But she dismissed me sharply. You don't need that. You're Ethan's wife, and Nix's family has always been just Ethan and me. Her words stunned me. That night I expressed my shock to Ethan, who explained, Mom's been clinging to Willie. She probably thinks you're trying to take him away. I'll talk to her. Over time, I managed to join them at the activity day, attempting to integrate as a mother figure, but Willie and I rarely interacted outside of these school events. Sometimes I sensed he wanted to open up, but my mother-in-law invariably interjected, blocking progress. I later discovered she had been tarnishing my image to Willie, suggesting I'd be happier if he weren't in the picture. This revelation deeply hurt me, highlighting the complexities and challenges of blending into a family with pre-existing bonds and hidden resentments. The accusations were harsh. She's a terrible person. Dad must be deceived by her too. Hearing such negative things from my mother-in-law must have influenced Willie during his impressionable teenage years. It was no wonder he grew distant from me. The situation was disheartening, and until then, I had never imagined she could be so manipulative. By the time Willie graduated from high school, he was eager to leave. He moved in with his girlfriend immediately and departed for college. Soon after, within a year of starting his career, he married her quietly and simply, without any formal ceremony. Once Willie was gone, my mother-in-law's behavior took a turn for the worse. Surprisingly, she ceased all housework, which had been a regular part of her daily routine. It seemed as though her new pastime was to find fault with me. She stopped cooking, something she previously took pride in, and would sit at the dining table waiting for me to return from work. The moment I stepped into the kitchen to prepare our meal, the criticisms began. You're inefficient. At this rate, it'll take you all night, she'd scoff. Admittedly, I was never skilled at cooking, mainly because I had relied on her for meals. Whenever I did manage to cook, she critiqued every dish relentlessly. This tastes awful, she would say as she grimaced. I'm sorry, I'm trying my best, I would respond, only to hear her retort, You're astonishingly tone-deaf when it comes to flavors, Patty. It's a good thing Willie never had to eat this. If she disliked it so much, I thought she might as well cook herself, but it seemed her goal was merely to berate me. Her complaints weren't limited to my cooking. She began to nitpick everything I did, from the chores I wasn't accustomed to handling, like cleaning to the laundry. Why are there so many wrinkles on the laundry? You have to vacuum every nook and cranny. You really can't do anything right. Didn't your family teach you anything? These jabs at my upbringing were especially painful. She would sigh, looking at me disdainfully, and say, I don't know how you won over Ethan, but I can't see much charm in you as a woman. And she always concluded with the same hurtful line, If you hadn't come along, Willie would have never left. I realized that her heart was aching from Willie's absence, perhaps a case of emptiness syndrome. I told myself that if venting her frustrations on me helped her cope, I should just bear it. But her antagonism intensified after a particular event, the announcement of Willie's wife Teresa being pregnant. The joy she showed was unlike anything I had seen before. "It's Will's baby. It's bound to be adorable. He'll be my first grandchild," she exclaimed with genuine happiness. Watching their elation, I found a small piece of joy for myself, too. Despite the ongoing challenges at home, the excitement of my mother-in-law over the impending arrival of her great-grandchild was nothing short of overwhelming. The catalyst for her exuberance came when Willie inquired if his wife Teresa could have their baby at our place. Given her family was an hour away by plane and they lacked local support, my mother-in-law, thrilled to be asked, immediately agreed to help. Unable to contain her joy at being needed, her preparations began almost immediately. Calls from Willie became a daily occurrence, each one sending her excitement soaring even higher. She dove into tasks with fervor, clearing out Willie's old room, organizing the space for the baby, and meticulously planning everything from the nursery decor to the baby supplies needed. She enlisted my help the moment I got home from work. "Patricia, I've taken care of the vacuuming in Willie's room. Could you handle wiping down the floors and the windows and make sure to wax them too?" she instructed with an air of urgency. "This weekend we're off to buy a crib," she added, as if it was the most natural plan for our weekend juggling these tasks. Late into the night after my shifts was grueling. Any attempt to shortcut the process was met with a stern command to start over. It wasn't long before her requests extended to finances. "Patricia, I need you to withdraw some money tomorrow. There are a few more things I want to pick up for the baby," she declared one morning. I hesitated, concerned by the rapid pace of spending. Shouldn't we wait for Teresa and Willie to arrive before we buy so much? Maybe Teresa would like to choose some things herself, I suggested, hoping to inject some practicality into the frenzy. Her response was sharp and dismissive. "How can you be so detached? It's Ethan's grandchild after all." "Oh, but of course you're not related by blood. You wouldn't understand, would you?" she retorted, her words laced with accusation. I tried to clarify my position gently. "It's not that I don't care. I just thought it might be nice for Teresa to have a say in her own child's preparations," I explained. My attempt to reason with her seemed to hit a nerve, and she looked at me with a piercing glare. Realizing I may have crossed a line, I watched helplessly as she turned and retreated to her room, deeply upset. I spent that night reflecting on the harsh exchange, feeling the weight of her words. The following morning, she stayed in her room, likely still angry about our conversation. Ethan was about to leave on a business trip and paused at her door to make a final remark. "I'm heading out. Don't dampen Mom's enthusiasm about the grandchild. She's been different since Willie moved out. You've noticed it too, right?" I nodded but added, "However, if we use up all our funds now, what will we do when Willie and Teresa need our help?" Ethan frowned, misunderstanding my concern. "Are you suggesting I don't make enough money?" "That's not it at all," I quickly assured him, but it was too late. He left visibly upset, and I was left alone to ponder the delicate balance of family dynamics and financial responsibility. As the one managing our household finances for over 12 years, I considered it prudent to think ahead. Ethan had always reassured me that my part-time income was for my use, so I diligently saved whatever I didn't spend, viewing it as a shared resource for our future needs. The financial stability of our household had been deteriorating steadily over the past 4 years. Ethan's salary had shrunk to 2/3 of what it was when we first got married due to his company's declining performance. Despite the uncertainty about the company's future and his job security until retirement, Ethan was reluctant to look for a new job. He was unwilling to relinquish his role as a department head, mostly to maintain appearances in front of my mother-in-law. As a result, I took on the responsibility of paying our rent while Ethan managed the other living expenses. We kept this arrangement hidden from my mother-in-law to preserve Ethan's dignity. One day, feeling the weight of recent tensions, I decided to leave work early to apologize to my mother-in-law. When I arrived home, she was already seated at the dining table, waiting. "I'm sorry about yesterday. I may have been too harsh," I began, but she cut me off with her icy demeanor, delivering startling news. "Willie and Teresa are coming back to have their baby here. I need you to move out," she stated bluntly. Stunned, I barely managed to ask, "I have to leave." She confirmed, "Yes, we don't need another mother figure. You've been redundant for a while now. Willie and his family will be living here. Make sure you're out by tomorrow." Her words hit me like a truck. I had never felt fully accepted by the family, always the outsider. Now, with Willie's return for the birth, it was clear. "You're a failure," she continued mercilessly. "You were allowed to experience raising a child. Be grateful for that. We have no obligation to support you anymore. It seems Ethan is tired of you, too. Maybe he's getting along well with a new girlfriend by now." Shocked and heartbroken, I grabbed my bag and left the house, wandering to calm my shaken spirit. I tried calling Ethan. Despite my mother-in-law's insinuations, he didn't answer, no matter how many times I dialed. I even called his office, only to find out he had taken a few days off. The suspicions seeded by my mother-in-law started to seem more plausible. Overwhelmed with emotion and tears streaming down my face, I found myself in front of the pub near the station. It was a place Ethan and I used to frequent when we first moved here. It still stood, a relic of happier times. As I entered, the pub owner's face clouded with concern before he recognized me. "Hey, long time no see," I remarked, trying to muster a smile amidst my distress. "Yes, it's been a while." "I remember you," he replied, offering a nod of recognition that brought a brief sense of relief. "Can I get a beer and a mixed plate of charbroiled chicken?" I asked, seeking a small comfort in this familiar place, a refuge from the storm swirling through my life. As I sat at the familiar pub, I engaged in light conversation with the owner, a man of few words. Sipping my cold beer and savoring the charbroiled chicken, I pulled out my cell phone. The screen lit up, displaying a photo of Ethan and me taken on Willie's 17th birthday. He looked dashing in the slim suit we had chosen together, and I remembered wishing for a closer family bond. The beer seemed to wash down the day's troubles, and as I contemplated my next steps, I browsed for moving companies, finding one available for the next day. I also bookmarked a couple of junk removal services, saving their contacts in my favorites. Changing the screensaver on my phone to something less personal, I felt a sense of mental clarity returning. The meal tasted exceptionally good, perhaps a small comfort amid the chaos. Deciding to give the situation more thought once I was back home, I walked away from the pub. A young waitress hurried towards me. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Patricia?" she asked, noting the screensaver before I had changed it. Confirming my identity, she hesitated before dropping a bombshell. She believed my husband was having an affair with one of their employees. We exchanged contact details, and she promised to keep me updated. The pieces began to fit together, validating the harsh words of my mother-in-law. Instead of feeling sad, a fierce anger surged within me. It was time to confront this head-on. That evening, I contacted the moving company and resolved to leave the next day. If there was no conspiracy and my mother-in-law and Willie were indeed plotting against me, I no longer felt obliged to maintain appearances, I thought. I packed my belongings relentlessly until midnight. The movers arrived promptly the next morning, and I instructed them to take everything I had purchased, intending to erase any trace of my presence. My mother-in-law was taken aback by my resolve. "I'm taking everything I bought. You can start fresh tomorrow," I declared, barely suppressing a laugh. Despite her protests, the movers efficiently cleared out my items, leaving behind only the baby gear and her old dresser, things from before my time. Well then, I bid you farewell. There should be no trace of me left, so enjoy your new life with Ethan, Willie, and his family, I said coolly, leaving her stunned. Placing the keys on the table, I exited the house, the movers following with my belongings. I decided to stay with a colleague temporarily, feeling a sense of completion and relief. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in months. 2 weeks later, Ethan finally reached out, his voice tinged with confusion and urgency. "Patricia, where are you? Willie and his family are here. Aren't you coming home soon?" "No, I'm not coming back," I responded firmly, recalling his mother's command for me to leave. Meanwhile, the young waitress from the pub had followed through on her promise, sending me a photo of Ethan chatting intimately with another woman at the pub and later entering a hotel with her. This betrayal erased any remaining affection I had for him. Armed with evidence of the affair, I prepared to confront the situation fully, no longer bound by any illusions of my old life. Having had enough, I didn't hesitate to make it clear to Ethan over the phone. "Willie and his family are moving in with you, right?" I asked, my tone firm. "I figured as much. I heard they've been struggling financially, going between part-time jobs since Willie graduated from vocational school," I added, sensing his hesitation. "No, I want you back, Patricia," Ethan replied, his voice edged with desperation. "I went to the pharmacy and they said you're taking some time off." "Yeah, I needed a break," I said nonchalantly, "but I'm fine, so don't worry about me. Your mom and Willie probably prefer having the house to themselves without me around." My blunt remark left Ethan speechless. He knew all too well that his mother and Willie had never accepted me, but he chose to ignore it. "All right, I need to talk, so I'll come back there," he said, a plea evident in his tone. A few days later, I returned to the house for the first time since leaving. Inside, I noticed new furniture and appliances. Willie and Teresa barely acknowledged my presence, merely nodding from their seats on the sofa without standing. As I sat down, my mother-in-law glared at me with a mix of shock and disdain. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Before I could rush my visit and leave, Willie confronted me. "What are you doing here? You took everything from the house. What kind of monster does that? Dad's been supporting you and you've had it easy," he accused. I exhaled, deeply frustrated. "I took everything because I paid for it. I was clearing out all traces of myself, just as you all wanted, right?" I countered. "That's crazy. There's no way you could afford all that just working part-time at the pharmacy." Ethan chimed in, turning to face him. I replied firmly, "We've been getting by on what both Ethan and I earn, and for your information, Ethan's company hasn't been doing well. His salary has dropped significantly, and for the past 4 years, I've been the one covering the shortfall. I've been paying our rent." My mother-in-law's face registered shock as she turned to look at Ethan, who awkwardly avoided her gaze. "I'm not just a part-timer. I'm a druggist, and the pay is quite good. I make more than Ethan now." The room went silent, the tension palpable. Turning to Willie, I decided it was time for some truths. "Since you're going to live here now, it's time for you to start taking responsibility. You'll be paying the rent to help your grandmother." Willie's face contorted in surprise. "Rent? How much is it?" "It's $7,200, I said firmly. "Good luck. Since it seems my role here is over, I have no obligation to take care of you anymore. You're going to be a father soon, Willie. It's time to pull yourself together." Teresa, overgearing the conversation, suddenly spoke up, her voice tinged with panic. "Wait, $7,200? Weren't we supposed to live here for free?" I stood up, ready to leave, satisfied that I had made my point clear. Covering rent and living expenses is part of life. Good luck figuring it out. As I walked out, leaving them to absorb the new reality, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The chapter of my life dominated by neglect and ungratefulness was finally closed. I almost burst out laughing at the absurdity of the situation, but managed to keep my composure. "Don't worry, Teresa. There are cheaper places available. Ethan still makes a decent salary after all," I remarked, watching her face relax slightly. Then, with a heavy dose of sarcasm, I added, "Oh, and since I'll be leaving, life might still get tough for you, Ethan, especially with your mistress, huh?" At that, Teresa's composure broke, and she dissolved into tears. My husband looked panicked. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. Teresa, through her tears, responded, "Oh, your mother told me about the new woman. I guess it's time to end my role as a wife, too." Ethan was flustered. "My mother said what?" he sputtered, realizing too late that I knew far more than he wished I did. "It hasn't even been 6 days since I left the house, Ethan. Wouldn't that hurt Grace if she knew?" I mused aloud. At the mention of Grace's name, Ethan's face went pale, confirming my suspicions. "This isn't the right atmosphere to discuss divorce papers, but I'll be in touch about that later, through my lawyer," I declared, standing up to leave. Neither Ethan nor Willie could find the words to respond. They remained silent as I grabbed my bag. My mother-in-law, however, stood up abruptly, slamming her hands on the table and yelling with a vigor surprising for her age. "What the hell? It's all your fault. Our home is in shambles." I shot back without hesitation. "It was you who told me to leave, you who hinted at Ethan's affair, and you who interfered with my relationship with Willie. Everything was because of you." I felt a rush of anger. I regretted not being more assertive in my relationship with Willie and not standing up to her sooner. "Willie has nothing to do with this, Ethan. It's time for you to step up. You're going through a hard time. You should support him as his wife. Take responsibility as a family member," I admonished. "What is she even talking about?" My mother-in-law muttered, bewildered. If she hadn't called Willie back home, if she hadn't hinted at Ethan's affair, I would still be supporting Ethan in this home. "Where are you, Willie? Why are you still here?" "It's all her fault," my mother-in-law concluded, her lips pressed tightly together, trembling with emotion. I slipped past the silent mother-in-law and quickly left the room. Afterward, Ethan agreed to the divorce rather easily. It seemed my determination and the undeniable evidence of the affair gave him no other choice. Shortly after, it seemed they began the process of moving out of the apartment. In the end, Willie and Teresa returned to their apartment, choosing not to live with the mother-in-law. Ethan appears to be considering remarriage, but Grace is furious over the alimony and his request for her to live with his mother. I've heard they're now considering what steps to take next. After everything that transpired, my mother-in-law ended up in a care facility. It's somewhat melancholy to reflect on the irony of her situation. After all the dedication she poured into raising her son and caring for her grandson, it seems they are now ready to move on without her. Perhaps in their eyes, she had fulfilled her role. If my mother-in-law had held her tongue back then, and if it had merely been a simple return home for childbirth, perhaps we could have continued living together even after the divorce. But things unfolded differently. Willie sent me an apology letter recently. In it, he expressed his childhood longing for more affection and explained that he couldn't talk to me freely because his grandmother disapproved. He also shared how pleased he was whenever I attended his school events. Reading his words, I wondered if maybe I should have made more effort to connect with him. Maybe then our relationship could have taken a different path. Despite the end of our familial ties, I find myself silently hoping for Willie's happiness in life. As for me, I've returned to my job as a druggist and rented an apartment close to my workplace. I didn't feel right keeping the furniture and appliances I had taken from the house, so I arranged for a junk removal service to take them away. life without the constant criticism and interference of my mother-in-law has turned out to be peaceful and comfortable. For now, I am focused on living for my happiness, no longer beholden to fulfilling someone else's expectations or desires. It's a new chapter, one where I can finally breathe freely and look forward to what comes next. Having recently lost my father, I decided to split the $5 million inheritance between my mother and myself. This resolution came during a poignant moment shortly after my father's funeral as I was reviewing the inheritance documents. Brian, without any right, casually remarked, "Laura, don't be greedy." His next words shocked me even more. Finally, I can quit my job. I owe it all to that doddering old man. I was appalled. "Are you referring to my dad?" I asked incredulously, unable to hide my shock. Brian ignored my dismay, and together with my mother-in-law, they excitedly made plans to buy a new car and go on a shopping spree. This unexpected behavior was too much for me. Here I was, grappling with my father's death, overwhelmed with household responsibilities, and now listening to them insult the man who had just passed away. The thought of continuing to live with Brian and my mother-in-law became unbearable. Trying to keep my composure, I managed a forced smile and said, "Sure, use the money as you and my mother-in-law please. My name is Laura Brown. I'm a 40-year-old housewife who works alongside my husband. I grew up as an only child to parents who were both doctors and ran a highly respected clinic in our hometown. They showered me with affection, and although I chose a career in pharmacology over medicine, they supported my decision. Tragedy struck our family 8 years ago when my mother died in an accident, leaving my father and me heartbroken. During those difficult times, Brian, then my boyfriend, was my pillar of support. We met through a mutual friend, and 3 years after my mother's passing, Brian proposed. Brian worked as an ordinary salaryman in the food and beverage industry. Despite my higher earnings, I believed that love would help us surmount any challenges. My father was thrilled when I announced our engagement. "I have seen how Brian supported you, Laura. Thank you so much. Please continue to take care of her," he said. Brian promised my father, "Standing tall, I will make her happy." I felt a surge of happiness standing beside him, convinced of our bright future together. But when we visited Brian's family to announce our engagement, his mother, heavily made up and a divorcee herself, looked me over critically. "Marriage, huh? You're Brian's choice. Isn't she a bit plain for you? And older, too. Wouldn't a younger woman be more suitable?" Her words were like a cold splash of reality in my dreams. Brian's retort caught me off guard. When his mother questioned whether a younger and prettier girl would suit him better, he said, "Mom, Laura works at Gold Pharmaceuticals, and her dad is a doctor who runs his practice, focusing more on the financial aspects of my background than my personal qualities." His mother's demeanor quickly shifted to one of approval. "Oh, Brian, you should have mentioned these important details sooner. That changes everything. I'm happy to approve of the marriage. Nice to meet you, Laura, and thank you." With his mother's approval secured, Brian was elated. Yet, despite the smooth progress towards our marriage, I felt a lingering unease as we prepared to officially register our marriage. My father, who was not only a doctor but also a property developer, presented us with a generous wedding gift, an apartment in Philadelphia, USA. I shared the exciting news with Brian. "Dad has given us this apartment as a wedding gift. It's our new home. Let's live here happily and peacefully together." Brian's smile radiated happiness, marking the beginning of our married life. However, the reality of married life soon revealed unsettling truths. Brian, who had lived with his parents until our marriage, seemed almost entirely incapable of handling household chores. He couldn't cook, was clueless about operating the washing machine, and showed no interest in learning. His habits were messy. He left garbage scattered around and never bothered to clean up. While I was committed to sharing household responsibilities evenly, Brian's carelessness only increased my frustration. During our first year of marriage, I shouldered all the household duties. Although it was our honeymoon phase, the burden of managing both work and home life alone wore me down. By our second year, I reached my breaking point and decided it was time for a serious discussion about sharing household duties. I gathered my courage and expressed my dissatisfaction to Brian, hoping for some understanding or willingness to change. To my dismay, his response lacked both gratitude and reflection. "I'm tired from work, too," he said dismissively. "You're much better at chores than I am. It's better if you handle them since I'm not good at it," dismissed so casually. Brian continued to avoid helping with the chores, leaving me to manage our home almost single-handedly as our marriage progressed. I found myself increasingly bearing the burden of our household responsibilities, but that wasn't the only challenge I faced after marrying Brian. I also discovered that his mother had some demanding expectations. Brian never showed much interest in celebrating seasonal occasions, so I decided to send a thoughtful gift to his mother for Mother's Day. I chose a high-quality scarf and a bouquet of carnations, thinking she would appreciate the gesture. However, her response left me stunned. She called me, sounding displeased, and criticized the scarf for not being a luxury brand item. I attempted to explain the quality of the scarf, but she dismissed my explanation, insisting that she only wanted gifts from renowned luxury brands. Feeling bewildered, I relayed the incident to Brian when he returned home, hoping for some support. Instead, his response was dismissive. "It's just a scarf. Just do as she says," he said. From then on, to avoid conflict, we resorted to giving her cash as she demanded. Moreover, by our 6 years of marriage, Brian's mother began to visit our home frequently, often finding reasons to ask for money. Brian, without hesitation, would always oblige, handing over money with a smile. Despite my having a job, Brian's income was modest, and managing our finances became increasingly difficult. Driven by desperation, I began to dip into our savings and cut living expenses. Despite my frustrations, I reminded myself that Brian's mother had supported me during tough times, and as the mother of someone I cared about, I felt compelled to endure these challenges. Now, in our 7 years of marriage, I continue to manage all household chores and the demands for money from my mother-in-law. During this routine, my father, whom I hadn't seen in some time, called me unexpectedly. The news he shared during our rare meeting was heart-wrenching. He revealed that he was suffering from terminal cancer and that treatment was no longer an option. Overwhelmed with shock, tears spilled from my eyes. My father gently stroked my head, comforting me as he did when I was a child, and softly said, "Laura, this is fate. Let's accept it quietly." Faced with this devastating news, my days became a relentless juggling act of work, household duties, and visits to my father's hospital. While my job provided some flexibility, managing the household remained a challenge. When I informed Brian that I would be caring for my father during this difficult time, he showed no reaction or willingness to help, leaving me to navigate these hardships largely on my own. "Please do your best," was all he could muster, and he visited my father in the hospital just once. With my attention fully on my father's care, I had little energy left for Brian. If I had any time to spare, it was only natural that I wanted to dedicate it to my father. One day, as my father lay weak in his hospital bed, he asked me out of the blue, "Laura, how is your marriage with Brian going?" His question caught me off guard. Reflecting on Brian's indifferent attitude at home and his mother's demanding behavior, I found myself at a loss for words. My hesitation must have spoken volumes, because my father gently told me, "Laura, you don't have to endure all this. Think about your happiness. Don't worry, you won't face any hardships after I'm gone." His words brought tears to my eyes, and I wept as he held my hand firmly and silently. 4 months later, the inevitable happened. My father passed away quietly amidst immense sorrow. I began arranging his funeral. Brian, however, seemed detached from my grief and offered no help with the preparations. Despite this, I was too occupied with the funeral details to focus much on Brian. Many friends and acquaintances came to pay their respects, making it a deeply moving farewell. Even the usually indifferent Brian and his mother attended. The day after the funeral, I received a call from a lawyer regarding my father's inheritance. I arranged a meeting to discuss the details, and what I learned was both surprising and overwhelming. After taxes, such as the inheritance tax, my father's estate amounted to over $5 million. He had been successful not only as a doctor, but also in real estate investments, leaving behind a substantial fortune, all of which was to be inherited by me, his only daughter. Filled with surprise and gratitude, yet trembling at the thought of managing such a significant sum, I proceeded with the inheritance process. After returning home, I spread out the documents I had received from the lawyer on my desk, reading through them. Exhaustion finally took over, and I dozed off on the sofa. When I awoke, I could hear the cheerful voices of Brian and his mother in the distance, discussing something that sounded far too jovial given the recent events. Their laughter and conversation seemed disconnected from the gravity of our recent loss, leaving me feeling even more isolated in my grief and responsibilities. As I awoke from my doze, I was surprised to see Brian approaching me with a beaming smile. "Yes, Laura, well done," he exclaimed, confused by his sudden excitement. I noticed the inheritance papers in his hand, the ones I had received from the lawyer. "Wait, don't just read those without asking," I said, shocked and angry that Brian had gone through the documents without permission. However, my mother-in-law, unfazed by my distress, happily chimed in. "Wow, an inheritance of $5 million. Isn't that amazing? Now we can live comfortably for the rest of our lives." I was stunned and couldn't understand why she was so exuberantly laying claim to the inheritance. Brian then turned serious and declared, "About this $5 million, I've decided it will be split between me and my mom." His words felt like a blow, especially since it was right after my father's funeral. Brian had looked through the inheritance documents without my permission and boldly stated, "Laura, don't be too greedy. Oh, now I can finally quit my job. I have to thank that doddering old man," Brian continued. "Are you talking about my dad?" I blurted out, my voice tinged with disbelief and hurt. "Well, anyway, let's proceed with the inheritance process and get the money into our joint account as soon as possible," Brian continued, ignoring my shock over his blunt and disrespectful remarks. As Brian and my mother-in-law excitedly discussed plans to buy a new car and go shopping, my emotions reached a boiling point. I was burdened with household chores and constantly asked for money, and now they had insulted my deceased father. Holding back my anger, I replied with a forced smile, "Sure, use the money however you and my mother-in-law please." Hearing this, my mother-in-law, seemingly satisfied, said cheerfully, "That's the spirit, Laura, quick to agree. Now make sure you work hard and earn money. I don't want our savings to decrease, so work hard." I just nodded, pretending to listen to her selfish words. Afterward, Brian and my mother-in-law began living extravagantly as if they had suddenly become millionaires. Brian quickly quit his job, and my mother-in-law practically moved in with us, staying at our house constantly. They would leave in the morning and return laden with luxury brand items from their lavish spending spree. They even started critiquing high-end restaurants. "The 3-star restaurant we went to today wasn't as great as I expected," they would say, discussing their outings as if they were seasoned celebrities, detached from the reality of our situation, while I was left to manage all the household duties as if I were a live-in maid. Brian seemed under the impression that my father's inheritance would be readily available. He began withdrawing money carelessly from our joint account, and my savings of $140,000 rapidly dwindled. When I confronted them about their excessive spending, Brian just laughed it off. "What are you worried about? Isn't $5 million coming soon?" "This kind of spending is no big deal," he said, completely ignoring my concerns. Then a month later, Brian and my mother-in-law abruptly left for a vacation to Hawaii. I wasn't invited and found myself alone at home. After waving them goodbye, I decided it was time to take a firm stand. About a week later, while I was enjoying a quiet day at home, I was startled by a loud knock on the door. Peering through the intercom monitor, I saw Brian and my mother-in-law standing there, dressed in Hawaiian shirts, looking puzzled. "What do you want?" I asked calmly yet coldly, angered by my demeanor. Brian retorted, "What are you talking about? Why won't the door open?" Confidently, I replied through the intercom, "Well, I changed the locks on the door, so of course it won't open. Why don't we talk this over calmly at the nearby cafe? Please go ahead. I'll join you shortly," I suggested. After a moment of shouting and frustration, they realized their efforts were futile and headed to the cafe. Once I was sure they had left, I followed them. Upon arriving, I found Brian and his mother already there, waiting in a state of fury. "What's this about? Did you change the locks? Hand over the new keys right now," Brian demanded. "There's no need for me to give you the new keys. You both need to leave that house," I told them calmly, facing a visibly angry Brian. I pulled out a piece of paper from my bag. It was a divorce petition I had already filled out. "Divorce? You're serious about divorcing me?" Brian was stunned. His mother, equally shocked and bewildered, chimed in, "Laura, why has it come to this?" Their reactions mirrored their disbelief, but I remained resolute, ready to reclaim my life and my independence from their unrelenting selfishness and disrespect. I spoke to Brian and his mother, who were now visibly panicking and flustered with the way you've been spending every day. "Are you sure your finances are okay?" "What money?" "Of course it's fine," Brian retorted vehemently, almost spitting as he spoke. "Your father's inheritance is coming, right? There should still be over $90,000 in our joint account. Look, I'll show you right now." Saying this, Brian pulled out his smartphone and quickly opened the banking app to check the account. His expression shifted suddenly. "What? What's this? Why is the money gone?" It was there just the other day. Hearing Brian's startled reaction, his mother also checked her phone, her face clouded with confusion. I decided it was time to reveal the truth to them while they were still trying to make sense of the situation. "Of course it's gone. I'm divorcing you, so I moved that $90,000 to my account as part of the property division," I said. "What do you mean?" Brian's face twisted in anger for a moment, but then he smirked as if a thought had struck him. "Fine, I'll divorce you, then transfer the inheritance you got from your dad right away. After all, property acquired during the marriage is split half and half in a divorce, right?" "You might be misunderstanding something," I replied calmly. "Did you not know that the inheritance I received, even though it was during our marriage, doesn't count for property division?" There was a moment of silence as this sunk in. Then Brian and his mother's expressions changed drastically. Perhaps they truly believed they would receive part of my inheritance. I could only sigh in disbelief at their ignorance. "No, that can't be true. That's impossible." His mother's face turned red, a mix of denial and anger flaring up. "Please check for yourself," I said, a hint of mockery in my voice. Brian started frantically searching on his smartphone. "It says here, property inherited by one spouse from a parent is considered separate property, therefore it's not subject to division and can't be split between the spouses." "What, seriously?" His mother, too, looked at the screen in shock. Then Brian approached me, pleading desperately, "Laura, please don't divorce me. I have no savings and no job. How am I supposed to live if you divorce me?" Faced with Brian's weak attempt to sway my decision, I spoke to him clearly and firmly. "What are you talking about? Take responsibility for your actions. I will never forget how you both treated me. I'm divorcing you, and I'll go to court if necessary," I stated firmly, my resolve unwavering. Brian and his mother, taken aback by my fierce determination, a side of me they had never encountered before, shrunk back in fear, their whispers barely audible, with their spirits clearly dampened. I walked out of the cafe with my head held high. In the weeks that followed, Brian and I underwent the divorce proceedings smoothly. The $90,000 I had prudently moved from our joint account was duly recognized as part of the marital property division. Over time, I succeeded in removing Brian and his overbearing mother from my house. Having frivolously spent the money from our settlement, Brian found himself without a penny to his name, compounding his woe as he was buried under a mountain of bills from lavish overseas trips and other reckless expenditures he had charged to his credit cards, plunging rapidly into debt. To manage these expenses, Brian and his mother were forced to incur even more debt, and now they reside in a dilapidated apartment, laboring tirelessly every day to climb out of their financial pit. The stark reality of their new humble lifestyle was a brutal shock compared to their previous extravagance. On my end, I made significant changes to my life. I sold the condo I once shared with Brian and moved into the apartment that had belonged to my father. I continued with my job, and thanks to the inheritance I received from my father, I now enjoy a comfortable financial situation. I live with a deep sense of gratitude for my late father, whose legacy has given me a new lease on life. With this fresh start, I am committed to cherishing my life and looking forward to a future filled with peace. I am determined to protect my happiness and spend my days living tranquil, savoring the stability and serenity I have worked so hard to secure. My focus now is on enjoying the simple pleasures of life, secure in the knowledge that I have overcome significant challenges and emerged stronger. My name is Amanda, and I am a 34-year-old administrative staff. Ever since I graduated from college, I've dedicated my life to my career. Initially, I joined a major company where I committed a decade to hard work and continuous self-improvement, earning several promotions along the way. This dedication paid off, and I am now a division head at a relatively young age. I am fortunate to have a boss who constantly provides invaluable advice and leads a team of highly motivated and talented individuals. My professional life has been incredibly rewarding and fulfilling. However, my personal life didn't follow the same successful trajectory. Since a brief relationship during my student days, I hadn't dated due to my intense focus on work. Concerned about this imbalance, a close friend arranged a dinner party to help me socialize. That evening I met Peter. He was a kind-hearted person with a warm smile and a very approachable demeanor. Being the same age, we discovered many shared interests and enjoyed engaging in conversations. We quickly became friends, exchanged contact details, and started spending more time together, just the two of us. After a while, Peter expressed his feelings for me, and we began dating. Our relationship blossomed, and eventually he proposed. I was overjoyed to marry someone I love so deeply. Following our wedding, I visited his parents' home to formally introduce myself. They were incredibly welcoming and warm, mirroring the kindness I had come to know in Peter. "Amanda, it's wonderful to meet you. I can't believe such a wonderful person has become Peter's bride," his mother exclaimed tearfully. "We are so proud of him for bringing such a fantastic woman into our family," his father added, while Peter playfully cautioned them, saying, "Hey, Mom and Dad, stop it, you're embarrassing Amanda." But they just laughed it off, saying it was all in good spirits. Peter's parents were as friendly and easygoing as he was. During our visit, they seemed impressed by my career accomplishments. "Amanda works for a major company, doesn't she?" "Oh, wow, that's great. It's cool to see a woman who can work so hard. Will you continue working after marriage?" They inquired, showing genuine interest in my life choices. Their open and accepting nature made me feel right at home, confirming I had indeed found my new family. When we decided to get married, I knew I wanted to continue working. My job at a reputable company was something I took pride in, and thankfully my future mother-in-law supported my decision. Unlike the experiences shared by some of my friends where they were encouraged to quit their jobs to support their husbands full-time, my situation was different. My heart swelled with gratitude and excitement, thinking about the progressive family I was joining. After the wedding, my husband moved into my apartment, and we began our new life together as newlyweds. Our days were filled with joy and love, both of us appreciating the time we spent together, me cherishing the moments at home with him, and him welcoming me back from work with a smile. 7 months into our marriage, my husband approached me with a concern. He proposed that we move in with his aging parents who needed more support. Though surprised, I understood his predicament, especially since he was an only child and naturally felt a deep responsibility towards his parents. Unlike my situation where my brother and his wife lived with my parents, my husband had no such support for his own. He suggested renovating his parents' house to accommodate 2 families under one roof. This meant we could have our private space while being close enough to care for his parents. It struck me as a thoughtful and practical solution. The idea of living in a beautifully renovated, spacious house yet maintaining our privacy was indeed appealing. The prospect of living with my in-laws seemed less daunting, knowing that we wouldn't be on top of each other all the time. I agreed to the plan, and my husband was overjoyed. His parents, when informed, were thrilled by the arrangement. As we discussed the details of the renovation and prepared for this new chapter, I felt a mixture of excitement and relief. It was a significant step, but knowing we were making the right decisions for our family's well-being made everything feel right. The support and kindness from my in-laws reassured me that we were on the path to creating a harmonious extended family life. When my in-laws visited us, their warmth and gratitude were palpable, enhancing the already cheerful atmosphere. Their kindness made me feel comfortable with the idea of merging our households into one. During this visit, my husband and I approached the topic of renovating his parents' house. The estimated cost was around $120,000. However, as we delved into the financial details, my husband hesitated before making an unexpected request. He asked if I could cover the entire cost of the remodeling. Surprised, I pressed for an explanation. He then revealed something even more shocking. His family was in debt, $170,000 in debt. This was the first I had heard of it. Neither during our dating period nor after our marriage had this been mentioned. The revelation took me aback, especially the magnitude of the debt, which was far beyond what I had imagined. He explained that the debt hadn't been overwhelming at first, but had grown over time. Despite his efforts, he couldn't manage to reduce it significantly. His parents, now on a pension, were also unable to contribute much towards repaying it. The financial burden was escalating, understandably. I was both surprised and upset by this sudden disclosure. I found myself in a difficult position, having had no prior knowledge of the financial strain that was part of my new family's life. My husband, looking earnestly at me, made another plea. He asked for my help to pay off his parents' debt, admitting that his salary wasn't sufficient to tackle this alone. He emphasized that renovating the house and living as 2 families was still crucial, and he hoped to continue with those plans despite the financial strain. He acknowledged the enormity of what he was asking. Effectively, I was being asked to shoulder $250,000 for both the debt and the remodeling. He expressed his commitment to our life together and his desire to support his parents out of love, not obligation. Apologizing for the burden, he promised to repay me gradually over time. This situation left me distressed. I realized that my husband and his parents had no one else to turn to but me. Though it was a challenging moment, it was also a testament to his trust and love for me. I needed time to think about how we could manage our finances together and still support his parents without jeopardizing our future financial stability. The weight of the decision loomed large, as it was not only about money, but also about maintaining the bonds of family and marriage. Feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the situation, I ultimately agreed to take on the financial burden after a sincere discussion with my husband. He had earnestly expressed his gratitude, shaking my hand with a deep sense of relief upon hearing the decision. My in-laws later visited our home to offer their apologies and gratitude. My mother-in-law, moved by the gesture, even shed tears of joy. I resolved to do my best from now on. Despite having some savings, the idea of paying the entire debt at once was daunting. Thus, I decided to pay $350,000 for my savings initially and handle the remainder through installments. When I discussed these plans with my in-laws, they agreed, suggesting I directly transfer the payments to the debt repayment account to avoid any mismanagement. This method seemed more efficient and secure given the large sums involved and would prevent the funds from potentially being mishandled during the transfer process. My husband supported this straightforward approach, which would also save time and reduce the risk of errors in handling money. Once we finalized these plans, I could see the relief wash over my in-laws' faces. Now we don't have to fear the monthly debt collectors that have been haunting us. My father-in-law expressed deeply appreciative. "You should thank Amanda properly," he urged my mother-in-law. "I can't even count how many times I've thanked you." "I can't thank you enough," she replied, expressing profound gratitude. While I was glad to see them relieved and happy, part of me felt uneasy. Their comments made me slightly uncomfortable, as if I were just a financial resource rather than a loved family member. Despite these mixed feelings, my primary motivation remained clear. I wanted to support my husband's family, whom I dearly loved. With these intentions, we proceeded with the house remodeling and completed our two-family home. It turned out to be beautiful and spacious, providing us all with a sense of accomplishment and a new beginning living together. Our daily interactions brought us closer, and seeing my in-laws' content in the environment we had created filled me with a sense of fulfillment. Despite the initial reservations as we settled into our new living arrangement, the joy and gratitude for my in-laws continued to remind me of the positive impact of my decision, reinforcing the bonds within our extended family. My husband's face brightened as he walked through our newly remodeled home. I too was thrilled, especially enjoying the upgraded modern kitchen that made cooking a breeze. The renovations had not only enhanced our living space, but also brought us closer to work, significantly reducing my commute. This newfound extra time was a blessing. I planned to use it to further my studies. Despite these positive changes, a nagging concern shadowed my days. I was diligently working to pay off the large debt we had inherited from my in-laws, yet my husband hadn't contributed financially. He had initially promised to help, but despite this, he hadn't made any payments from his earnings. When I confronted him about his financial contributions, he simply stated that his salary wasn't sufficient to assist in the debt repayment. Curious and a bit skeptical, I asked him to show me his pay stubs to understand our financial standing better, but he refused. I persevered, working tirelessly for a year to reduce the debt. During a family discussion, my in-laws inquired about the progress on the debt repayment. I informed them that we had managed to pay back about $50,000 this year, leaving us with an approximate balance of $110,000. They were astonished by the amount I had managed to clear on my own. "Amanda, that's incredible. At this rate, you could have the entire loan paid off in about 4 years," they exclaimed. Their gratitude and emotional response made the hard work feel worthwhile. However, just a few days later, an unexpected event occurred. I was scheduled to work late, so I informed my husband I'd be home after my usual time. But work wrapped up earlier than expected, and I headed home early, looking forward to a peaceful evening and perhaps surprising my husband with a homemade dinner. But as I opened the door, a familiar sight caught my eye. My in-laws' shoes were by the entrance. Surprised, I realized my mother-in-law and her family must have visited unexpectedly. The situation piqued my curiosity and a mix of emotions as I walked in, not sure what to expect with this sudden family gathering. As I approached the living room, I thought I might find my husband and his parents busy with something. Instead, I heard snippets of a conversation that stopped me cold. "Peter, you were right to marry that woman. You did great. I can't believe you snagged a woman with that much money just because she works for a big company. You played your cards right," one voice said. Then the talk shifted, and I heard mentions of gratitude and manipulation. "You should be more grateful," one voice said. "Oh my, you're one of the ones who racked up that debt," another retorted. They argued about who spent what on horse racing and gambling, all while praising the stroke of luck that brought me into their family for financial salvation. They even joked about discarding me once the debt was cleared. Laughter followed, chilling in its casual cruelty. Frozen by the door, I struggled to process the deception. When I finally gathered myself, I announced my arrival loudly and stepped into view. My husband and in-laws turned to me with smiles, welcoming me warmly as if nothing had happened. "Oh, Amanda, welcome home. Good job. Let's have dinner together later," they chimed, completely oblivious to the turmoil inside me. The warmth of their smiles now seemed sinister, knowing the true sentiment behind them. Throughout the evening, I kept my composure, hiding the storm of emotions raging within. Later, alone in my room, I wept, not just from sadness, but also from a profound sense of betrayal. Over the next few months, I secretly laid the groundwork for a divorce, preparing myself emotionally and financially, still outwardly playing the part of the devoted wife. Finally, when I had everything in place, I revealed to my husband that I had paid off the entire $170,000 debt. His reaction was one of disbelief, not realizing the extent of the resources I had or the resolve I had mustered. "I have quite a bit of money saved up," I said calmly, holding back the tide of emotions. The revelation set the stage for my next steps as I readied myself to start anew, free from deceit and manipulation. Initially, I was cautious about paying off the massive debt in one go, so I began gradually drawing small amounts from my salary and savings. However, once the remaining debt dipped below $120,000, I decided it would be more efficient to clear it all at once. When I explained my plan to my husband and showed him the bank statement proving I had paid $110,000, he struggled to hide his excitement. "Wow, Amanda, thank you. My dads are going to be thrilled about this," he exclaimed, covering his face with his hands in a dramatic show of emotion. Shortly after, my in-laws came over to express their gratitude. "Thank you so much, Amanda. You're like an angel to us," they gushed. If I hadn't overheard their true feelings about me, their words might have filled me with joy. Instead, I was painfully aware of their deceit, and I maintained my role only because I was already preparing for what was to come. A few days later, my husband asked for a serious talk. His expression was grave as he delivered his shocking news. "Amanda, I'm sorry, but you have to leave. I have a new girlfriend, and I'm going to live here with her. You're going to my parents' place," he said, expecting me to be surprised. Confusion clouded my mind. "I don't understand what you mean," I replied, playing into his narrative. "You're just not understanding at all. I don't need you anymore, but since you're a good breadwinner and housekeeper, you can stay here if you want," he said dismissively. As he spoke, the front door swung open, and my in-laws walked in. "Peter, did you finally tell her?" they asked eagerly, almost gleefully. "Yeah," I told her. "I wish I could have seen her face," he replied. "That's how it is. You can stay and do chores for us. Of course, we'll have to charge you rent," they added, revealing their true expectations. This entire scenario unfolded as I had feared based on their earlier candid conversations. Knowing their plans for me didn't make the revelation any less bitter, but it fortified my resolve to act on my escape plan. I had already laid the groundwork for a new beginning, free from their deceit and manipulation. As I navigated these revelations, I prepared to turn my back on this toxic environment for good. My husband's laugh echoed sharply, mocking me as if to underscore how despicable they all were. But I had prepared for this moment more thoroughly than they could imagine. "Well, it's time for all of you to leave," I declared calmly. My in-laws scoffed, rolling their eyes at my audacity. "What are you talking about? Do you think you can manage that?" they challenged me. I smiled a cold, steady smile that I felt all the way to my core. "Actually, I can easily afford the renovation myself, plus I've transferred the house deed into my name. That means I get to decide who stays and who leaves," I stated firmly. The color drained from their faces as the realization dawned on them. The room fell into stunned silence, only to be broken by my husband's retort. "But you've paid off our debt completely. You're the one losing money here. Without that debt, we might have managed to scrape together enough to afford a new place." "True, you lived comfortably while I shouldered your debts," I replied evenly, then dropping the bombshell I added, "But here's the fact. I didn't actually clear the remaining $110,000 of your debt. The money you saw missing from my bank book, I simply moved it to a different account. The debt is still yours to pay." The impact of my words was immediate and devastating. "You mean the debt collectors will start coming again?" My husband stammered, disbelief and fear mingling in his voice. "That's correct," I continued, "and Peter, since you've admitted to having an affair and planning to divorce me for your girlfriend, you'll be paying alimony. And yes, I'll be including your partner in the lawsuit for the affair." Panic flashed across his face. "But she's with me because I own a house and have money. If you charge me alimony, she'll leave me." "I'm not concerned with your romantic troubles," I stated bluntly. "I'm done here. You and your parents have shown your true colors, selfish to the core. I'm severing all ties with you." As they processed the full weight of the situation, I concluded, "And just so you're aware, I've put this house on market. I will also be reclaiming through my lawyer the $80,000 I pay towards your debt." The room was heavy with shock and silence as they absorbed the loss of everything they had taken for granted. My in-laws stood frozen, realizing too late the consequences of their actions. As for me, I was finally free from deceit and manipulation, ready to move forward with my life on my terms. After discovering the depth of deceit I was subjected to, I took decisive legal action. I filed for divorce and sought alimony from both my husband and the woman he had an affair with. Additionally, I demanded $8,000 from my in-laws, accounting for the financial support I had previously provided. The duplex we renovated was in a prime location, attracting a buyer quickly, a family searching for a two-family home. It sold for about $220,000. From this sale, after covering the $80,000 debt repayment and the $120,000 renovation costs, I netted a gain of $60,000. This, combined with the alimony from my ex-husband and his affair partner, significantly improved my financial situation. Moreover, I received a modest sum of $8,000 from my former in-laws, further offsetting my expenses. Despite the tumultuous events, I ended up in a surprisingly favorable financial position. The experience, while harrowing, taught me a valuable lesson in trust and financial prudence. Having a considerable amount of savings initially helped me immensely. I was investing and learning how to manage my finances effectively to clear my in-laws' debts as swiftly as possible. My investments paid off, growing substantially within a year. Coupled with a recent raise at work, my financial standing allowed me to take bold steps to rectify my situation. In the end, my former in-laws found themselves back where they started, burdened with debt and without a home. As harsh as it may sound, their deceitful acts brought them to this point. This ordeal has been a profound learning experience for me, reinforcing the importance of vigilance and financial literacy. Moving forward, I am committed to continuing my financial growth, enhancing my assets, and ensuring a comfortable future. More importantly, I aim to foster relationships with people I can genuinely trust, hoping to create many happy memories without the shadow of deceit. As for the twist of events, it's a compelling narrative that underscores the importance of standing up for oneself and taking control of one's own destiny. It's a story of empowerment and resilience in the face of betrayal and deceit. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more updates. See you in the next video. Hello everyone, my name is Taylor. I am a single mother who went through a lot of hardships to raise my son Eric. Many single mothers out there have supportive families. I thought I had one too. Turns out I was wrong and I found out the worst way possible. Thankfully, I was able to get back at the people who tried to mess up my and my son's life. My ex-husband Carl is an abusive crap. The very thought of him fills me with disgust. There was a time when I was head over heels in love with him. Things went downhill after I married him. Carl was a great boyfriend, but as a husband, he was a nightmare. He was controlling and slowly started to become abusive. I stayed in that marriage for over 8 years. It was mostly because he had manipulated me and baby-trapped me into being with him. At first, I thought that my son deserved a father, so I didn't leave. However, things took a turn for the worst. One day when Eric was 5, Carl started to hit me very hard. My poor son saw me in pain and tried to stop his dad from beating me. Carl was so deep in anger that he ended up pushing Eric to the floor. That's what it took for me to leave him. One call to CPS and the police was enough to keep Carl away. However, he was determined to get back at me. He said, "You think you can run away from me, Taylor? That will never happen. Sooner or later, I will have you and my son back in my house. You just wait and watch. We are getting a divorce, Carl. There is no way in hell that I will allow you near me and my son again. Even if we divorce, I'll find a way to take Eric. I am his dad, and I have rights. He will be in my home, and so will you. Mark my words." Carl's behavior and his violent history made me very paranoid. My son was extremely traumatized and had to go to therapy to deal with his issues. A long court battle later, me and Carl were finally divorced. I didn't end things there. I literally moved away near my parents and sister to be safe from Carl. I even got restraining orders against him. It was the most horrific time of my life. Carl never knew where I had moved. He could have guessed, but he didn't have my exact address. Being near my parents and sister made me feel safe. However, my parents were not really that supportive of my divorce. They said, "Was it really necessary to get a divorce? You two could have attended therapy and talked it out. It's not a big deal. Yeah, poor little Eric had to lose his dad over your problems. That's so unfair. He must be devastated not being able to see his dad. Are you serious right now? Carl used to beat me up, Mom, and he had put his hands on Eric as well. My son was only trying to protect me. How can you not see what a monster Carl is? Mom, Dad, you two need to be a little sympathetic about Taylor. She has been through a lot. You have no right to make her feel guilty. She did the right thing." But first, Mom and Dad used to try and talk to me about letting Eric see his dad. However, I never allowed it. My parents were never happy with my logic. They always said, Why don't you let Carl visit Eric? He must miss his son. How would you feel if I wasn't around when you were growing up? I know I would have been devastated. Taylor, you lived and prospered in a household with 2 parents. You can't be so selfish with Eric. He deserves the love of his father. Soon he will start resenting you for not allowing his father to stay in his life. What are you even talking about? Eric is absolutely scared of his dad. He begs me not to go near him again. He has no intentions of ever seeing his dad again. And neither do I. You must be influenced by all the violent stories you have told about Carl. You should have not dragged Eric into your issues. He learned to be afraid of Carl from you. That is ridiculous, Dad. If Carl was such a good man and a loving father, he wouldn't have hit me in front of him. In fact, he should not have hit me at all. No matter how hard I tried, they would never agree with my decision. However, as time passed, they seemed to have accepted my decision. They were very close to Eric and were doing a great job being good grandparents. Eric also developed a close connection with them and with his Aunt Blair. I think part of the reason my parents stopped pushing me was the fact that I was financially helping them. Me and Blair sent monthly allowances to our parents because Dad doesn't have a good job while Mom doesn't work. Money might have been a reason why my parents eventually went silent about the matter. Me and Eric were thriving in our new home. Eric joined a local school while I was working a good job in an office. Things were going great, and I was happy surrounded by family. However, I had no idea that my loved ones could be so horrible to me. My second biggest betrayal in life happened just a year after I left Carl. I was all set to go on a business trip to another city. I couldn't take Eric because there was no provisions to keep children at work. So I was in a rut, wondering what to do with Eric. That's when my mom and dad suggested the plan. They said, "So I heard you will be leaving for a business trip soon. Me and Stuart have been thinking about babysitting Eric for you. We can stay back at your house and take care of both Eric and the house. Are you sure about this? I mean, Eric can be a little handful. Plus, you will be leaving your apartment empty. Wouldn't it be a hassle? It's only a matter of days, so I don't think it will be much trouble. Plus, we love Eric and he loves us too. I'm sure you will be thrilled to spend these days in our care. Yeah, the 2 of us can stay here and babysit for you. Your house will also be safe when you go on this trip. It's like you will get 2 benefits in one." "Okay, if you are insisting so much, I will leave Eric and my house with you too." I agreed to let them babysit Eric and stay at my house until I came back. I was feeling pretty satisfied with the arrangements since I trusted my parents blindly. I now know that I made a huge mistake. I shouldn't have trusted my parents at all. My business trip happened only a week later. I flew out at night after kissing Eric goodnight. I had to leave a day earlier to prepare for a meeting with big clients the next morning. I called my parents and Eric after reaching the hotel. Everything appeared to be normal. However, I had no idea what was going to happen at night. When I was in my hotel preparing for my meeting for the next day, I got a call from Blair. For some reason, it made me a little panicky. I thought something was wrong at the house. I picked up the call, feeling nervous. Blair said, "Hey, Taylor, have you already flown out for your business trip?" "Yes, Blair. I came here yesterday. I had a late-night flight. It won't be a very long trip." "Have you left Eric with our parents, Taylor?" "Yes. What's wrong? They are staying at my house with Eric. They take such good care of him, and he loves to be around them." "Taylor, I don't know how to say this, but I think you made a mistake. You should not have left Eric with our parents. They are planning something, and I don't think you will like it." "What do you mean? Tell me everything right now. You're scaring me." "Taylor, I think Mom and Dad will try to make Eric meet with Carl. They've been against your decision to take out the restraining orders. You know how they hate it. Your divorce and everything. I have a bad feeling they will take Eric to Carl." "What the hell are you saying?" No. Mom and Dad can't do that. I'm sure there has been some misunderstanding. They didn't approve of the divorce, but they weren't siding with an abuser. I know you trust them a lot, but you need to be careful. If you need anything, I'm right here. I want you to remember that. Thanks, Blair. I'll be careful. Don't worry. Honestly speaking, Blair's words were ringing in my head. It did make me very uneasy, so I decided to call my parents and check up with them. I said, "Hey, Mom, can you hand over the phone to Eric? I want to talk to him a little. I'm missing him a lot." "I can understand, Taylor. Hold on. I'll put him on the phone." "Mom, are you there? Hi, Eric. I'm just checking up on you. Is everything okay? Are you having a good time?" "Mom, I need to tell you something. Grandma and Grandpa have called Dad. Oh my God, my phone is about to die. I'm so sorry, Taylor. Now I have to put it on charge. Why don't you call back later? Eric is fine and playing with us. You don't have to worry about anything. Take care. Bye." Something made me really suspicious about the way Eric tried to talk to me. What was worse was the fact that Mom snatched away the phone and didn't let Eric complete his words. My head was reeling from the situation, so I decided to check the security camera footage. I didn't have any cameras in the house, but I did have them outside. Lo and behold, in my driveway was my freaking ex-husband's car. I was shocked. I remembered the footage and saw the car was in my house. My freaking mom opened the door for him. After looking at the footage, I was immediately enraged. I was also scared for Eric and my own life. Carl was not supposed to have my address. Hell, I have a restraining order filed against him. He should not have been around my son. I was furious and called my parents straight away. "Don't worry, I also recorded the call," I said. "Mom, why the hell is Carl at my house? What the hell is going on? Who permitted you to let him in?" "God, you need to relax, Taylor. Carl is not here. Why would you even say such a thing?" "Mom, I can see his car parked in my driveway. Did you forget that I have security cameras outside? I freaking saw you open the door for him." For a while, there was a pin-drop silence on their side. Neither of them spoke a word to me. I could tell that I had made them nervous. However, nothing had prepared me for what happened next. "Look, I know you're upset at Carl and us, but you're being very unreasonable. You need to cut us some slack. Yes, I'm very disappointed in you, Taylor. You cannot separate a son from his father. Eric needs Carl in his life. You're not being a good mom." "Please tell me you are joking. Carl literally abused me physically. Hell, he even hit Eric when he tried to save me. How can you allow Carl back into his life again? I have a restraining order against him, for God's sake." "That was a long time ago, Taylor. We must forgive people. He has changed. Your stupid restraining order was causing a lot of problems. Yes, so I and your mom decided to take matters into our own hands. We gave Carly our dress since you won't. We reunited father and son. They are so happy together." "Mom, Dad, I will give you exactly 5 minutes to kick Carl out to the curb. If you don't, there will be consequences. Don't threaten us, Taylor. We are your parents. You are 3,000 miles away. Carl will stay here as long as he wants. We are planning a picnic tomorrow. Now I am hanging out before you talk any more nonsense." Mum said that and simply hung up on me. I literally gave them 5 minutes to kick Carl out. When 5 minutes passed, his car was still in the driveway. I had had enough at that point. I felt scared and betrayed. I knew that I had to act fast, so I quickly called law enforcement. I gave them the rundown of the situation and told them to arrest Carl. I also told them to take Eric from my parents and give him to Blair. The police acted fast and reached my house within 5 minutes. Staying near a police station was the best decision of my life. I saw them confront my parents and Carl through the CCTV footage. My mom and dad looked panicked as they went in to arrest Carl. Mom called me and said, "Taylor, what is wrong with you? Did you call the cops on us?" How could you do this? You know Carl could go to jail. He will go to jail, Mom, and you will too if you don't leave my house right now. I don't want you and Dad on my property again. I have called Blair. She will come and take Eric. You will never come near us again. How dare you, Taylor? You are a horrible, horrible woman. I wish you were never born. You cannot kick us out and take our grandchildren from us. We won't let that happen. Good luck with that, Mom and Dad. The police will stop and arrest you if you do anything stupid. They know that Eric will go with Blair. You can't do this. We have grandparent rights. We will sue you. Good luck trying to fight me in court. It'll be fun to see the judge react when she realizes that you brought an abusive man into my house to spite a restraining order. You'll be laughed out of court. Before either of my parents could reply, the police came out with handcuffs. Carl was escorted out to the police car and put in the back seat. It gave me relief and satisfaction to see him back with the police. Then the police started to talk to my parents. They were flustered, and my dad was starting to shout at the cops. I'm sure they were trying to argue about Eric. Right then, my sister Blair showed up. She showed the cops her ID and took Eric with her. My parents tried to stop her, but the police intervened and kept them at bay. Then the cops stayed behind until my parents gathered their stuff and left the premises. My sister locked my house and took the keys from my parents. My parents tried to call me and scream at me about the whole situation. However, I didn't receive their calls. They then started to text me with some weird messages. I recorded all their texts because they were getting really interesting. They said, "What you did today wasn't right, Taylor. There will be consequences of this. You have no right to take Eric away from us. Carl, I can't believe you are my daughter. I hate you. You won't be able to keep us at bay, Taylor. You are a working woman. You won't be with Eric all the time. We will get visitation from the court, and then we will take Eric away from you. One CPS call from us can take Eric away from you. If you think you are smart, we are much smarter than you. We will call CPS and tell them some bad stuff. They'll place Eric in our care, and he'll never return to you. That will never happen. Eric will stay with me, and I will do everything in my power to keep him safe. We know where Eric goes to school, Taylor. We know your address. We'll find a way to be with him. You cannot stop us. Yeah, if you act crazy, we will take him away from you. You will never see him again." My parents are stupid. Yes, I can see now that they are horrible people, but they are also very stupid. They still expect that everything will go their way. They had no idea what I was going to do. Only time will show them. He had already made a huge mistake teaming up with my parents. He would suffer as well. I quickly completed all my work and returned home as soon as possible. Blair kept Eric safe, and he was staying at her house until then. Eric was extremely relieved to see me again. He said, "Mom, you came back. I thought you won't come back for me." "Eric, what are you saying?" "I went on a business trip. Of course, I was coming back." "Dad said you had left me, Mom. He said that he will take me away with him. He showed me pictures of his house and everything. I was scared. I didn't want to go with him. Eric, listen to me. I will never let Carl take you or even be near you again. I'm not going anywhere, I promise you, son." I spent a long time consoling Eric and making sure he was okay. Apparently, Carl was talking about me abandoning him and how he was there to take Eric away. I was freaking pissed at Carl. CPS did get involved and heard Eric's account. They recommended therapy, and Eric is already going to one. I have also signed up for group therapy for me and Eric. Our therapist is a great woman and really helps us get over our trauma. All the documentation of crimes committed by Carl was used by my lawyer in court. He was charged with attempted kidnapping and violating a restraining order. He's actually looking at jail time. I'm currently in the process of making Carl terminate his rights to Eric. My son deserves a good dad and not an abuser like Carl. My lawyer is very skilled, and we are hoping for a smooth process. As for my parents, they did try to sue me for grandparent rights. The judge took one look at my court history and the texts they sent and dismissed the case. I went a step ahead to get restraining orders against them. The judge approved that straight away. Currently, I have shifted with my son to a different state. I got a promotion at work and took a higher position in a different city. It helped me move away from my parents. Blair does visit me from time to time. She has even cut off contact with our parents and is thinking of moving to my city. My parents are having a hard time with money. Since Blair and I have both stopped helping them out, they were forced to look for extra jobs. Lawyer fees drained their savings and have made them really financially unstable. Meanwhile, my son and I are thriving in this new environment. I have no intention of ever contacting my parents or allowing Carl to traumatize my son again.